Any day now, anyway now, I shall be relieved. They say everything can be replaced, yet every distance is not near. So I remember every face of every man who put me here. I see my light come shining from the west and to the east. Any day now, anyway now, I shall be relieved. They say every man needs protection. They say that every man must fall. Yet I swear I see my reflection someplace so high above this wall. I see my light come shining from the west and to the east. Any day now, anyway now, I shall be relieved.
I have shared with you this musical collage to create a context for this presentation and to impress upon you the importance my work has been for me over these many years. Had what happened to my son some 16 years ago, when he was only 14, when he had inadvertently killed a 16-year-old boy in an altercation, for which he was tried as an adult in the state of Florida and convicted and sentenced to serve life without the possibility of parole. Had that never happened, I would not have had any interest in what I'm doing now. I never would have had the opportunity to be most inspired by working with inmates whom others have outcast or discarded and feared by most, whose opportunities in life appear to be evaporated with no possibility for a future. Had what happened with my son never happened, I never would have gone behind prison walls and access jails or work with ex-offenders and contribute something for them that's missing for them in their lives. They can have their lives working, for which they can be inspired by a new future of possibilities. And had this never happened so many years ago, that I never would have dreamed in my worst nightmares would ever happen, I never would have had the life I get to live now and to have the impact on people that I have the opportunity now. So had it never happened, I never would have been in this course. I never would have enrolled in the master's program at the International Institute for Restorative Practices. And so because of all of that, I am here. So rather than reflecting upon my experience of the work in this course point by point, I'm incorporating all of my responses, comments related to the rubric questions more organically as I proceed with my presentation. What I've discovered over these years, it has been a nagging problem, a nagging worry, has been how to demonstrate the effectiveness of the programs that I have assisted in developing, that I have implemented, that I have created, and have delivered myself. All of our evidence has been anecdotal. Wardens, correctional officers, inmates released from prison, becoming successful in how they live their life. None of this matters when what's of greatest importance to policymakers is having documented effectiveness, empirical research that backs the best practices, So the best practices of our programs need to be grounded in empirical research, because the policymakers expect that the practices be evidence-based. And these evidence-based practices, for having been demonstrated through the findings in research, inform further practices and the expanding of practices in the implementation of new programs that are further studied in research and found effective. So there are expanding opportunities for implementing programs in my area of interest in working with inmates and ex-offenders, both in prisons, in jails, and reentry programs. Although practitioner or action research was not content included in this course, other than the chapter presented later in our course book, my experience of creating and implementing a workshop based on restorative practices for my action research project this last summer in Restorative Practices in Action impressed me with the importance of research and seeing the potential for research documenting my own work. So out of nothing, other than my past experience designing programs for adult education, I created Restoring Success, a restorative workshop, to be my real-world context for studying my effectiveness and for improving my own skills and the methods that I use. Fifth Street Ministries is an organization that provides food and housing for the homeless and for displaced families, for people struggling with addictions, and for ex-offenders unable to acquire work and to find housing, was very enrolled in having me use their facility to implement this 8-week program. I was intending to integrate specific restorative concepts and experiential restorative practices for the first time in my experience designing and developing any programs. The entire workshop was founded on fair process. Everyone interested in participating had an influential voice in drafting a participation agreement, and no one was considered a participant until they gave their word by signing our mutual agreement to abide by the terms we had all proposed and had accepted. In this way, we all had personal and mutual accountability for honoring our own word by keeping the agreement, including me as the practitioner participant, a title with which I dubbed myself, so that we could each monitor ourselves and one another to provide feedback and support for working the program. This is important to note because of the evaluation of a quantitative research article I was to do later that studied a similar phenomenon of peer influence that I reviewed in this course on evaluation of research. Throughout the workshop, we incorporated circles at the beginning and end of sessions, practiced using restorative questions, and learned to interact with each other and with others while being aware of the social discipline window. I found myself challenged to carefully monitor myself and what was working and not working throughout each session of the program, so I could modify the timeline and redesign upcoming sessions as needed. I had to be flexible and responsive to the time constraints, to the participants' needs and their expectations, to the program promises I had made, and, of course, to our mutual agreement. I was required to use measurement tools to assess my effectiveness and influence with the participants, and learn to design and use surveys, both closed Likert scales and surveys with open-ended responses, open interviews, attendance records, and the attrition of participants from the program. Since college almost 40 years ago, this was the first time I had collected useful data. Because of that experience, my interest in research and in conducting research was revived. I could envision opportunities for future research in the study of subjects other than me, myself, which evaluation of research has further opened up to me. The qualitative research article I selected within my focus of interest involving corrections and rehabilitation was Early Desistance Narratives, a qualitative analysis of probationers' transitions towards desistance, and, in spite of my eager anticipation, was found to be only moderately trustworthy due to irregularities in the research design and lack of transparency of the research procedures in the reporting. However, valuable information was forthcoming that did support the core proposition presented by the researcher. Desistance refers to desistance theory, which involves understanding the process through which offenders desist from criminal behavior and are considered rehabilitated. Theory has postulated that desistance narrative A cognitive pattern represented by emerging themes in thinking and speaking is considered to become evident only later in the process, in phase 2, and not in phase 1. This study proposed that desistance themes begin to be constructed early in phase 1, which included the emergence of an individual's sense of moral agency, an awareness of past events having been conditioned without the experience of having personal agency to act intentionally, coupled with a sense of powerlessness and lack of autonomy. These revelations are crucial to me in my work in designing and implementing programs for facilitating cognitive or perceptual shifts that question and impact inmates' narrative scripts. Narrative deconstruction challenges existing criminal identity through experiential exercises that allow for the construction of new identities that perceptually begin to be experienced as a new, real identity. Desistance maintenance was found greatly contingent upon supportive shifts in both personal and social contexts of an individual's life, which is highly relevant for strongly informing restorative justice practices involved in developing effective reentry programs, for providing community mentoring and engagement, and equally important, the acknowledgement by others that successful desistance is occurring or has occurred. The most significant weaknesses in the study were a highly homogeneous sample that was unrepresentative of the offender population and the potential sampling bias in the sample selection of probationers being performed by the supervising probation officers according to undisclosed criteria for offending or non-offending behavior. Interviews were conducted by the researcher in a probation office, which potentially, because of the setting, influenced responses out of probationers' fear and reluctance of being forthright and open about offending behavior or even offending ideation. Had greater detail been provided in respect to safeguarding the sample selection and to the interview process and the interview questions asked, greater confidence may have been created in the results. Had external third-party verification of the research design and reporting been employed, the methodology and analysis would have been considered more rigorous and supported. As was acknowledged by the researcher, transferability is considered limited beyond the insight gained into the formation of desistance narrative early rather than late in the desistance process, which was clearly apparent in the themes derived from the interview responses. This quantitative, non-experimental secondary data analysis correlational study was found to be highly reliable. Potential threats to the research integrity were well managed. Both sample size, data collection, vetting, and verification, and the identification of potential variable interaction accounted for assuring increased internal validity. I was surprised to discover the research was a study of a program design similar in concept to the workshop I had developed and implemented at Fifth Street Ministries this summer in conjunction with Restorative Practices in Action, and identified and supported a similar structure for engaging peer influence for pro-social behavior in 3 prison therapeutic communities known as TCs. Participants in the TCs issued both corrections to peers for violations and acknowledgments for pro-social behavior toward others. Research found a significant correlation between acknowledgments issued and the incidence of pro-social behavior, which has a direct implication and support for restorative practices that I incorporated in the program I created, Restoring Success, a Restorative Workshop. The programs required acceptance of a predetermined agreement as a precondition for participation, which differed from the restorative design I employed of having participation be contingent upon participating in drafting the agreement and having an influential voice in proposing and adopting the terms. The study documented that peer influence in TCs occurs and is correlated with acknowledgement rather than with correction, which directly supports methodology I have employed. Yet I see the potential for further study of the effect of having an influential voice in creating agreements and being personally responsible for being accountable to that agreement as associated with encouraging pro-social behavior. Circle processes effectively address noncompliance or violations of agreements and provides for acknowledgement for honoring the agreement. So, peer participation consistent with providing acknowledgement, as found in this study, encourages pro-social behavior within programs for peers to participate in the exercises and activities and may encourage participation in community projects beyond the program itself, which would be generalizing or expanding the pro-social behavior to others beyond themselves. This mixed methods research study first determined whether the success in recidivism produced by the Pathway Total Reintegration Program in New Zealand was statistically significant by comparing recidivism rates of participants to quantitatively derived data from the Department of Corrections, and then to explore what elements of the program contributed to that success in the experience of participants who participated in semi-structured interviews. The findings are deemed highly valid, reliable, and trustworthy, found to produce recidivism rates that were statistically significant. Identifying the most influential element of the program design defined the purpose for the study. Crucial interventions were incorporated for reentry, including restorative reintegration conferences, individualized plans for each participant depending upon particular needs for community support, a community mentor, and involvement in community projects, and ongoing social work support, which was determined to be the most significant element in desistance and reduced recidivism. The Pathway program demonstrates the necessity for seamless planning and provision for ex-offenders' needs for desisting from crime, the most important of which is having ongoing social work therapeutic support in conjunction with other interventions.